we don't know if you're someone up here gathering intelligence. We don't know what you're doing.
Well, I'd hope that everyone gathers intelligence.
I don't feel the need to ask to exercise my right to freedom of the press. Because if you have to ask, it's no longer a right. Isn't that right, gentlemen?
Is liberty dying where you live? Escape to Keene at freekeene.com.
Good morning from PorcFest 2015. We're going to be going on a bit of a road trip today, and the plan is to go to Derby Line, Vermont, where there's a portion of the border that actually crosses through a town. And there's even apparently a library where the line crosses through, and all of y'all have decided to join me. What motivated you to come on the run for the border here today?
I've been to PorcFest several times. I would just want to get out and explore more and see how the world passport thing works out.
Are you going to try to cross the border?
Yeah, I've just got an enhanced driver's license, which I think is a chipped driver's license, which
that should get you
I've crossed a few
right?
times with it. So.
And Mehdi, you're from Canada originally.
I'm from Canada, so I got my Canadian passport. I'll see what happens trying to get back in. I usually get
Have you ever walked across the border?
Never.
We're going to try that today.
Yeah, too.
All right.
Well, being against the idea of borders and imaginary lines, I think it's an important thing that anarchists would be involved with, is trying to demilitarize and neutralize these zones in which people can't cross because of citizenship or other petty reasons.
Yeah, and
I
Mandy.
actually saw this story on I guess a History Channel, something or the other.
A story about Derby Line.
About Derby Line. They talked about the line going directly through the library, and I said I was always going to go there. And this being my first PorcFest, I said, what better way to experience than with a bunch of fellow anarchists? So I get to fulfill my dream and do it recklessly.
And what is your what are you going to use to try to cross the border?
We're going to see if a regular driver's license
Okay.
works.
All right, so we got the enhanced driver's license, Canadian passport. You got a U.S.
I
passport.
have a U.S. passport and a New Hampshire driver's license. I'm going to try it first with just the New Hampshire
Just the driver's license. And then just a Georgia driver's license.
We'll see.
And then I have the world passport issued by the World Service Authority. And are you coming?
No, I just want to wish you good luck.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're about ready to head out. Here with Mehdi, we're actually now in Derby Line in a very, what appears to be a very small main street with mostly empty storefronts.
It does look like a lot of abandoned buildings.
It's sad.
I'm very curious as to whether these buildings were abandoned before the Border Patrol came in.
That's a good question.
if
Yeah,
it
what
was
did this town
after.
look like? I mean, there's a cafe, but they're not even open.
Yeah, the restaurant is bombed out too.
But none of us have cell service except for you, Mehdi, and so you're looking for, I think it's the Haskell Library.
Here it is.
Yeah, I have roaming,
But it says it's in Quebec.
backup
It says the building's in Vermont, but the address is in Quebec, so I think that's the direction we should go. Turn back and report to border crossing, Highway 55 or Route 143. So this potted plants are literally the border, apparently. And then we turning from the potted plants to the threatening sign from, this is a little more of a threatening sign. It's got a fine.
You have things that they threaten you with on this
Yeah.
penalties or whatever. But it looks like this house is like in the U.S., yet it looks like it's getting power from Canada.
Yeah, it does look that way.
But then it's also connected over here, I believe.
Well, we came all this way, and it's closed. Now, it's interesting they put those potted plants on that street, but if you really were wanting to like get through, it wouldn't be that hard to turn into this parking lot, cut across the grass, and get into Canada. Like right there.
The parking lot is public, right? It's public property.
Yeah.
I mean, the library is public property, so I presume the lawn.
There's no flower pots over there to keep us out.
Are you guys gonna open today? No? Oh, is it?
Oh.
Is it a Canadian holiday?
Canadian. It's a Canadian holiday.
Woo! Thank you.
Ah, didn't know that one, huh?
I didn't know that. Funny. It's
Who
supposed to be
is
a
St.
provincial
John the
holiday.
Baptist?
We don't have that in Ontario. It's a provincial.
Oh, okay.
Sure. It's not a federal one.
Well, we picked the wrong day to come to the border town. And another camera. Don't see any on this
And
side.
there's a sign that'll probably be threatening.
Access prohibited.
Oh.
Here's the borderline. US and Canada. Oh, you're an illegal. Garrett's an illegal.
Oh, that's the line. We're not supposed to cross that, I guess. Well, they want us to. Why would they put a sign there if they don't want us to read it? So there's some sort of power source because they have the solar panels.
Yeah.
I wonder what that's powering.
The gate.
It's electric.
Yeah.
Where's the other camera?
Just that one there. I don't see one on the US side here.
There's one.
Oh, really? Where?
Telephone pole.
Oh, up there, yeah. So here we are getting close to Interstate 91. There's another street down here, the FedEx building, and yet another gate. It's almost symbolic, isn't it? I mean, you've got this big grassy area right here that anybody in a car could easily cruise right onto and then be in Canada.
Well, I think it demonstrates the lack of threat of this area.
Oh, look who's watching.
All of this just to keep people out from seeing a different country.
It's so different over there. Oh.
It says arrête instead of stop.
That's right.
Which is interesting because
Yeah, that's true.
After touring Derby Line's various border streets, we walk east onto the bridge over Interstate 91 to document the major checkpoints on both sides there. While we encounter no issues from the Canadian side, it's not long before the U.S. border guards start shouting at us.
Being shouted at.
Was he yelling at you or was he yelling at someone in a car?
He was yelling at me for sure. They started walking over here. Getting very uppity over there.
It's funny, people that are so paranoid of cameras that are absolutely surrounded by cameras. I couldn't even try to count how many cameras they have focused in different directions down there, and they're afraid of our little
Right.
$200 device.
Our security is being violated.
I guess they know at this point we're not just tourists. I'm
Yeah.
just taking it out.
They're going over to a cruiser. They're walking over to a cruiser. They're coming up this way. Just plan to keep walking personally.
Afterwards, you can do what you want. Just hear me out for a second. Wait.
Why would you want a U.S. citizen to suspend recording? I mean, if what we're doing is not...
Hear me out. Because one, we don't know who you are. Granted.
I'm a human being.
Okay. All we're asking is, if you're going to do that, just ask, because we don't know if you're someone up here gathering intelligence. We don't know what you're doing.
Well, I'd hope that everyone gathers intelligence.
I don't feel the need to ask to exercise my right to freedom of the press. Because if you have to ask, it's no longer a right. Isn't that right, gentlemen?
Representatives?
I'm sorry?
Are you a media representative?
I don't know what that means. It sounds like a legal
Are you a
term.
member of the press?
Again, I don't know
The
what
press and
questions you're asking
organization
me.
that you join?
It depends on where you're from.
All right. You guys have a good day.
All right. Freedom, baby.
Have a good day, guys.
They don't want anyone to gather intelligence. They want them to be stupid.
Y'all should just follow orders like we do. Life's so easy when you just follow orders. You don't have to think.
When he said turn it off and hear me out, I started turning on my secondary camera. Maybe we should see what the secret thing is he's going to tell us, but I guess it never came out.
They didn't even check our licenses or try to.
Well, they don't really have a reason to detain us.
Right.
Oh, no radar detectors allowed in Canada, huh? Interesting. Oh, here's the border, right here.
At this point, due to a coerced agreement with the Canadian border guards, we're unable to show you our approach and initial interaction with their agent, though it was recorded.
Welcome to Stansted.
During the interaction, he claims that Canada has a free press, but that apparently does not apply at border checkpoints. After being very nicely threatened with arrest for obstruction, I stopped recording and we began the process of checking IDs and questioning. We were detained for approximately 90 minutes, and 4 out of 5 of us ended up being allowed across the border.
All these things are without borders, but there's very much a border here. So while we were in there, the head agent in charge came down and talked to us and said there was no filming on the property permitted. And so we were showed a piece of paper that said like what you're authorized to film if you get permission, and it was still limited. It still said that you couldn't identify agents, you couldn't zoom in on toll booths or the checkpoint booths, and it said you couldn't also identify passengers, vehicles, identifying info pretty much for anything. So it sounds like you can get permission to film at those checkpoints, but you're very limited in what you can disclose about the checkpoints. And yeah, they made it seem like they were very nice for authorities with guns compared to Americans. In fact, there's a lot of things that would have been interesting to document, like Border Patrol agent giving a dog a treat that was coming across the border. We were the people that were detained the longest. Everyone that's come through went through fairly quickly. Everyone else seemed to have passports. We did not present passports. We only had licenses that we used as IDs. Ian did try to use a world passport. That was denied. He was asked for, or wasn't, they said they were going to need more identification, so he presented his driver's license. He's still being held, but allegedly will be out shortly.
In Canada, I was not allowed to enter. They did not like the world passport. They say the world passport doesn't actually identify my so-called citizenship, even though it says I'm a world citizen. There are certain countries that you need to have what is called a visa to come into Canada from, and so if I were coming from one of those places or were originally from one of those places, it would be a problem, and so that's why they couldn't accept the world passport. They did let all 4 of the other folks in by just showing driver's licenses. So normally you just need a driver's license to get into Canada. I was denied ultimately because I've been convicted for obstructing government administration and also the more recent so-called unsworn falsification situation. So basically I am prohibited from coming into Canada for basically a decade. And then if I want to come in, there's some sort of a rehabilitation process that I would need to go through, which costs money and time and whatever. So now I'm going all by myself into the US checkpoint. And given that I am all by myself, I feel like I should probably record this interaction. Good afternoon. It is not. Should I turn it off?
Yes, please.
All right. Is it illegal to record this?
Ian has just been released from the border checkpoint.
Yeah.
So you were detained at the U.S. border?
That's correct.
Wow. Did they escort you back to the U.S. border, or did they just tell you to walk up there?
I walked from Canada to the U.S. Side. Was told to stop recording because I was by myself. I figured I was going to record as long as I could. I was told to stop recording and then told the world passport's no good. I needed another form of ID. I showed them the license. They asked me to go in there. He asked a bunch of questions about, am I a citizen? I'm like, well, you guys would probably consider me a citizen of the U.S. They claim it's my obligation to prove that I'm a U.S. citizen in order to be granted entry in here. Do I have a birth certificate? No, I don't have a birth certificate with me. So I said, are you going to deny me entry into my home country? And he said, no, I just have to, it has to be proven that you're a U.S. citizen. And there were several more questions about, have I ever exited the country before? And I had, back when I had the old passport. And by the way, they told me that an expired U.S. passport is valid proof that you are a U.S. citizen. So All right, so we're back together with the crew from the trip to Canada, and it's actually a few days later now at the Porcupine Freedom Festival. We're on the last day because we were in such a rush to get out. We didn't really have time to do a recap the day of. So, what do y'all think of how it went?
I'd say 4 out of 5 is a successful number. I would also say that for my first big activist event, why go small, go big, and play with the U.S. border control?
It was your first time leaving the U.S., right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
And you didn't know what to expect, right?
I did not know
You
what
kind
to
of holding
expect.
back in the beginning, but then you came up and you got through your driver's license.
I did. Just a driver's license, no enhanced thing, no RFID chip. Weren't really hassled by the Canadian folks. They were a lot nicer than the U.S. Border Patrol, who asked me a few questions, and I'm very well aware I could have been detained, but I think they were just kind of sick of us and ushered us through back into the country.
Well, yeah, because I got detained quite a bit by the U.S. guys, and I also had a driver's license. They gave me a lot of trouble, but you didn't really have any trouble coming back yet.
The whole line of questioning consisted basically of him asking me if I had a birth certificate with me, which I did not. Then he asked me if I had ever owned a passport. I said no. And he asked me my date of birth, what we were carrying in, which was food from the restaurant we went to in Canada. And then he kind of just told me to get lost. So I think he was just sick of our group, actually.
All right. Now, Mehdi, you're from Canada originally.
Canada, yeah. I thought we had initial meeting with the Border Patrol. I guess they were the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol because of the videotaping on the street and in the States, which was allowed. It went, I think, pretty well. They didn't really do too much. The border part, I was nervous because I was nervous about coming back in because my car was in the States, and so I was a bit nervous about that. I found the Canadian side a lot nicer. At least they had a better way of communicating. They were in charge, yes. They have the costumes and the badges and whatever trappings of government, but the way they spoke was very relaxed. At least I found.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
came a lot after what time you guys went. I mean, they called for the pizza place to see if it was open for us.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what if that service. Like,
Yeah, I wish we
they're the
could've
server
gotten that on
protecting.
video.
I got my money's worth in the serve aspect. That's for sure, because they really have good service there. Coming back wasn't too bad either. Actually, I think they already knew us from the videotape. So, yeah, but it was a good experience. It really was.
Well, I mean, we were detained for an hour and a half, basically, so I don't know if
You're
it's
right.
a good experience from that aspect.
Yeah.
That's actually
But-
true. Yes.
It was an experience, and we were able to at least help some people understand what that experience is like for people, and I think that's the real value of it. Paul?
My takeaway was similar. I noticed the stark contrast in the degree of, I would call it professionalism, when someone's treating you like a human being, versus the just the robot-like automatons on the U.S. side that were just, and they tried to dehumanize themselves as much as possible just to maintain that raw authority, to intimidate people. I think it's just to get people to just cower and do what they say. And it was pretty stark on those 2 border crossing points, because, like he was saying,
The contrast, you mean?
yeah, the contrast. Yeah. The Canadians were, especially that one guy who was downright jovial. So,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, we were detained for an hour. So,
Yeah, it was funny. The Canadians detained us for a longer period of
Yeah.
time than the U.S. guys did, but it was a more comfortable detention. It was more friendly.
detention.
I think we should also mention too that with none of us on either side did they check bags.
That's true.
They went on our
Strange.
word when we were bringing our food in. So I guess I'm kind of questioning the real responsibilities and duties of the patrol if they're not checking bags and making sure you're not a terrorist.
Yeah, it could have been packing anything in there. That's for sure. Garrett, what did you think?
I think it was a very successful trip. I mean, it was unfortunate that you were not allowed in. It does seem that both sides, obviously before we crossed the Canadian border, the U.S. side was taking issue with filming that was going on just out on a public street. Now, it appears that you were detained for a longer period of time. I'm not sure if that's because you were denied on the other side or if because you
I don't
filmed
know
going
why.
into the United States checkpoint. But it seems that our takeaway can be that if you film at a international border crossing, you are very likely to be detained for a longer period of time. I don't know if the U.S. authorities inquired into wanting to see your videotape or that you
They, at
couldn't
the very
videotape.
end, did ask about what I had recorded, and I sort of explained to him. And one of the guys looked like he wanted to see the footage, but the older guy just kind of waved him off and said, basically, let him go with it. So
So it does seem that there's the understanding, at least, that our right to record exists. Had we not asserted it, maybe they would have acted as though it had not. But we did assert it at every point at which it was questioned, and I'm pleased with the response of both sides. One of my issues with the United States side was that they wanted to tell us something off camera that needed to be relayed that could not be relayed publicly. And if they're interacting with the public, I don't see why anything should be secret about that. They don't know us from Adam, so they should treat us as though we are what we are as the general public. The Canadian side, even though they wanted us to turn off the cameras, I didn't get the impression that there was anything secretive that was necessarily going to go on. I mean, granted, anytime someone tells you you have to turn off the camera, it evokes that. But it was a very standard processing from what I was expecting from the Canadian side, as far as what's your business, how long do you plan to be there, are you bringing anything in? And taking our word for everything that we said was always appreciated. The authorities don't always necessarily take your word for what you say.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I thought that it was an interesting contrast, and similar to the last time I actually did cross the border. The Canadian guys were they seem more easygoing than the U.S. guys. The U.S. guys this time, they had a real martial kind of feel. They had the military style haircuts and everything. You didn't really see that with the Canadian side.
No, I got the impression that the United States side had far more of a patrol presence in the streets of Derby Line, Vermont, than there was at all. I didn't see any border patrol.
No cruisers around in Stansted, Canada?
There did not seem to be on the
Just
Canadian
the
side
crossing
any
point.
enforcement.
Yeah.
Just
Interesting.
the checkpoint itself.
Well, also too, we should mention the fact that when we went into Derby Line that day, the town surrounding the checkpoint was completely desolate and the buildings were empty, and this was supposed to be Main Street.
Yeah.
So I, like all of us, kind of wondering if that checkpoint was the cause of this and if that is what's preventing people from wanting to live in the town.
I know I wouldn't want to live in a town
What it
where
kind
there's
of
a bunch
looked
of
like
cops.
in that town is that the houses were on one side, the businesses were largely on the other side, and they choked them off from each other.
Exactly.
So, I wonder if the town is drying up and blowing away because of the border being
Sure. The commercial infrastructure seemed to be just across the Canadian side of the line. There were some cafes, restaurants, and some convenience stores and such. And the only thing on the American side of the line was one giant Irving gas station. Every other restaurant, cafe seemed closed.
Yep. Well, guys, thanks for coming along. Hopefully it was a learning experience for all of us, and maybe to some extent the viewers at home. I think the big takeaway is, yes, you can get into Canada with a license. That's no problem. And then coming back into the U.S., they could hold you up like they did with me, or they might just let you through like they did with Mandy.
Yes.
I mean, it's a roll of the dice. They were claiming to me that it was my obligation to prove that I was a U.S. citizen, and when they would ask me questions about, are you a U.S. citizen, I wasn't answering straight out because I don't believe in those ideas, right? But they do, and if I wanted to get back in, so I kind of answered it in sort of a generic, like, well, you guys would probably consider me a U.S. citizen. Like, I didn't want to identify with it. So I was kind of giving them tough answers, and that might have delayed my detention as well. So, I don't know. It's interesting that
tough
you had
answers with all of them.
Yeah.
Because when we were first approached, about the cameras on the bridge, they were firing off some questions, and if you don't do this every day, you'd be a little intimidated. But you guys held your ground great.
Cool. Well, we're about ready to get to the group photo here at the Porcupine Freedom Festival. It's the final day, and thanks you guys for coming on the trip, and it's been fun.
Nice, thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.